Hello friends, welcome to iQUANTA. Here is the video full solution for CAT level RC set 10, and Facebook members must have already gone through the passage and they can directly jump to the solution part. But those of you who have not read it yet, you can pause the screen and read the passage now. And after reading this page, you have to pause your screen here again and read the remaining passage. Now that you have read the passage in its entirety, we can start talking about it. So, the passage is actually about a recent development in Europe, where the Council of Europe is talking about communism, and it is actually targeting the idea of communism, and this is a recent development. And who is heading this movement? This Göran Lindblad, who is a Swedish MP. He is kind of leading this movement, and he has come up with his own arguments that why this communism is a very bad thing and why it should be wiped out completely. So here he quotes that crimes of totalitarian communist regimes, that means he doesn't consider this communism to be a very good thing. And here in the second paragraph, the author talks about the timing of this new offense, this ideological offense, that he has chosen actually a very good year for this, because this is the 50th anniversary of Nikita Khrushchev's denunciation of Joseph Stalin and the subsequent Hungarian uprising, and which will doubtless be the cue for the further excoriation of the communist record. And then she explains that what could be the purpose of them doing this. So, this Göran Lindblad has claimed that different elements of communist ideology, such as equality, social justice, and these things still seduce many across the globe, and that is why it is required to wipe out this communism entirely. And there is a sort of nostalgia for communism in some of the places across the globe. He is talking in the global term. Perhaps the real problem for Mr. Lindblad and his right-wing allies in Eastern Europe is that communism is not dead enough, and they will only be content when they have driven a stake through its heart. That means they want to finish the communism, even a notion of communism entirely. There should not be even a notion of communism according to these European groups, according to the Council of Europe. Though they could not pass this motion right now, but they just missed it very marginally, very narrowly. And this attempt has been called fashionable and nonsense. When they try to equate communism with Nazism. So both are known to be very extreme ideologies, very fanatic ideologies, and they have made an attempt to compare the communism with fascism or Nazism. But the author is actually not very satisfied with this comparison, and you need to understand what is happening in the passage. There is one group of people, the European Council of Europe, European Council, they are saying that communism is actually a very bad thing. They are only pointing out the negative aspects of communism, and they want to bring it in a bad light, so that no one talks about it, no one thinks about it, no one raises a demand for communism in any part of the world. That is one view. The author is somewhat of a different view. The author says that though they have highlighted all the bad aspects related to communism, they missed out on highlighting all the bad aspects of those colonial forces in Europe, that their atrocities on people was not different from the atrocities committed by Stalin. And in case of Stalin, it was an individual's atrocity, because he was carried away by the idea of superiority, and it was not an atrocity caused by the ideology of communism. That is what the author is trying to argue. But in case of colonialism and Nazism and fascism, it was an atrocity driven purely by the ideology. And here in the next page, the author draws some comparison that how it would be easier to take the Council of Europe condemnation of communist state crimes seriously if it had also seen fit to denounce the far bloodier record of European colonialism, which only finally came to an end in 1917. And this was a system of racist despotism which dominated the globe in Stalin's time. So this is what I was saying, that author believes that because this ideology was more bloodier than communism, and even when we talk about communism, it is not the entire ideology, but a time which was dominated the globe, an ideology that dominated the globe in Stalin's time. And while there is precious little connection between the ideas of fascism and communism, that means there is no connection according to the author. In this sentence, the author is trying to say that precious little connection is like no connection, almost no connection between the ideas of fascism and communism. There is an intimate link between the colonialism and Nazism. So Swedish MP Göran Lindblad was trying to connect fascism and communism, but here according to the author, actually it is the colonialism of Europe which is rather closer to Nazism, not communism. And the terms this Lebensraum and Konzentrationslager, these two sound to be foreign terms, and you can see that they are German terms actually. So used by German colonial regime in Southwest Africa, now called Namibia, which committed genocide against the. So here it is actually a comparison that how colonization of European, of different parts of worlds by the European forces was more bloodier than any kind of bloodshed caused by communism. And this Council of Europe avoids to talk about that, and it only compares communism with fascism in its attempt to put communism in a bad light. Now, no major 20th century political tradition is without blood on its hand. So that means blood is everywhere where there is a race for power, but battles over history are more about the future than about past. Part of the current enthusiasm in official Western circles for dancing on the grave of communism is no doubt about the relations with today's Russia and China, but it also reflects a determination to prove there is no alternative to the new global capitalist order. So the author doesn't agree with this capitalist approach as well, and the author says that their attempt also reflects that they have just started this criticism afresh. This also reflects a determination to prove that there is no alternative to the new global capitalist order. That means these European forces, the capitalist nations, are trying to establish the fact that you don't have any option, you don't have any choice, you have to accept the order which has been created as new global capitalist order, and that any attempt to find one is bound to lead to suffering. That if you try to look for any alternative, you will only find suffering and nothing else. With the new imperialism now being resisted in the Muslim world and Latin America, growing international demands for social justice and ever greater doubts about whether the environmental crisis can be solved within the existing economic system, the pressure for alternative will increase. So here the author is in favor of looking for the alternatives. The author doesn't believe that the current and new global capitalist order is the final order that everyone has to accept. Russia and China are there. Some other Muslim countries are looking for new kind of order, and you cannot just denounce communism and put it in a bad light by highlighting the atrocities committed by Stalin and say that accept the order that is there. So though the author doesn't support the idea of communism entirely, but the author is not as critical as that statesman. So that statesman Göran Lindgren, what was his name? Göran Lindblad, he is more critical about communism than the author, and author thinks about this same thing in a different way. The author thinks that this is actually their main agenda, that they are trying to establish the order that they have set, and they want the world to believe and accept this order. So, this is the content of the passage. Now, let us move to the questions. Question 1 says that among all the apprehensions that Mr. Göran Lindblad expresses against communism, which one gets admitted, although indirectly, by the author? So, Mr. Göran Lindblad was certainly against the idea of communism, and he has put many apprehensions against communism. Communism is a very bad thing because it killed a lot of people, and it was not good because of this, it was not good because of that, and there should not be any notion of communism anywhere in the world. So, he has actually put some apprehensions against communism, and which of these has been accepted by the author partially, if not entirely, then partially, or maybe indirectly. So, one says that there is nostalgia for communist ideology even if communism has been abandoned by most European nations. So, whose claim is this? This is a claim made by Mr. Göran Lindblad, not by the author. So, Göran Lindblad has said this in the passage. So, we can rule this out. 2 says that notions of social justice inherent in communist ideology appeal to critics of existing system. So, notions of social justice inherent in communist ideology, do they appeal to the critics of existing system? This will be something that you are imagining, because these people, the critics of existing system, they have not been discussed anywhere. So, you cannot say this for sure that what do they believe, does this idea appeal to them or not. If you go with this choice, it is like your imagination. But 3 says that communist regimes were totalitarian and marked by brutalities and large scale violence. This may not look like the answer considering the tone of the passage, but actually this is the answer. Why and how? Because the author has made comparisons in brutalities committed by these communist forces and by these communist regime and the other one like colonial forces. So, these communist regimes, they also committed some brutalities, and those colonial forces, they had also committed some brutalities, and both were driven by different reasons. But if you talk about brutalities, it is the mindset of superiority, not the ideology of capitalism or communism. So, here the author has said that if the European Council is talking about the brutalities committed by the communism, it should have also talked about the brutalities committed by the colonial forces, but they have deliberately avoided that. So, in making this comparison, somewhere and somehow, because although indirectly, so the author has not directly accepted this, but if you make this kind of comparison, it was kind of whataboutery. So, if communism has done this, what about colonialism? It was also brutal in its own ways. So, by making this kind of comparison, you are somewhere somehow accepting that communist regimes were totalitarian and marked by the brutalities and large scale violence. And this is exactly what this gentleman is trying to say. This is what this gentleman is trying to say, that and this is the question, that among all the apprehensions that expresses, which one gets admitted, although indirectly. So, out of these things, this is an apprehension which was expressed against communism, and by making that comparison, somehow and somewhere that author agrees with this apprehension. And 4 says that the existing economic order is wrongly viewed as imperialistic by the proponents of communism. So, this is not an apprehension made by this gentleman. And 5 says that communist ideology is faulted because communist regimes resulted in economic failures. So, the author does not seem to agree with this, because according to the author, this communist ideology resulted in some good, some good things related to economy. So, the author does not seem to agree with this. So, the answer is 3, and this is the only choice where the author, by making that comparison, somewhere agrees with this apprehension. Question number 2, it says that what, according to the author, is the real reason for a renewed attack against communism? This question is very interesting, and it is related with the final paragraph, because only there you find a conclusion. The passage was actually very beautiful and questions are also very good, and here in the last paragraph, this thing has already been underlined, that it reflects this attempt that you have started, your current enthusiasm in the official Western circle for dancing on the grave of communism. That means this recent criticism of communism is no doubt about relations with today's Russia and China. So, it is about that, plus it also reflects a determination to prove that there is no alternative to the new global capitalist order, and any attempt to find an alternative is bound to fail. So, here is the conclusion, and answer is related to this part. So, what according to the author is the real reason? So, the author has highlighted that real reason in the final paragraph. So, from there you have got the answer, and one says that distinguishing the unintended consequences of the current economic order, such as social injustice and environmental crisis. So, you will not find any mention of this environmental crisis and social injustice, and the author is actually not citing this as the real reason for this current criticism of communism. But are they trying to idealize the existing ideology of global capitalism? Yes, they are trying to kind of establish that you have to accept this existing global order which is based on capitalism. So, yeah, they are trying to idealize, and this has been cited as the actual reason behind the current wave of criticism. 3 says that making communism a generic representative of all historic atrocities, especially those perpetrated by the European imperialists. This is absurd and not very relevant, because this was not the main reason for the recent criticism. Communism still survives in bits and pieces in the minds and hearts of people, and that is why there is this wave of criticism. No, that was not the actual reason. That was a very superficial and a reason only on the surface level. 5 says that renewal of some communist regimes has led to the apprehension that communist nations might overtake the capitalist. No, there is no such feeling among the European nations, and this is also absurd. So, the only choice that has got some weight is 2, because it was clearly indicated towards in the final paragraph, and from there you get the answer. Next one, it says the author cites examples of atrocities perpetrated by European colonial regimes in order to. So, you see that the author has actually cited the atrocities perpetrated by European colonial forces here, and here the author directly says that it would be easier to take the Council of Europe's condemnation of the communist state crimes seriously if it had also seen fit to denounce the far bloodier record of European colonialism. So, here you can see a comparison is being made, and then the atrocities has been mentioned one by one from here till here till here till here, and yeah. So, in this part it only highlights the atrocities committed by the European colonial forces. So, why this example was given? Why the author has cited these examples? What was the motive? So, one says the author is trying to compare the atrocities committed by the colonial regimes with those of communist regime. Some of you might have gone with this, that both the regimes have committed atrocities, and the author is trying to make a comparison, but this is not the answer. You will understand why. Just keep listening. 2 says that the author is trying to prove that the atrocities committed by colonial regimes were more than those of communist regimes. Some of you might have gone with this also, but this is also not the answer. 3 says The author is trying to prove that that ideologically communism was much better than colonialism and Nazism. Interestingly, this also looks like the answer, but it is not correct answer. And fourth one says that the author is trying to neutralize the arguments of Mr. Lindblad and to point out that the atrocities committed by colonial regimes were more than those of communist regime. It is also like it is saying this 2. So 2 and 4 are kind of saying the same thing, that here you are trying to prove atrocities committed by colonial regimes were more than those of communist regimes, and here you are saying just by adding this that the author is trying to neutralize the arguments of Mr. Lindblad and to point out that the atrocities committed by colonial regimes were more than those of communist regimes. So you are kind of saying the same thing. 2 and 4 are brothers, same content. And 5 says that the author is actually trying to neutralize the arguments of Mr. Lindblad and to argue that one needs to go beyond and look at the motives of these regimes. And here these regimes refers to the European Council, the present regime, and this is the answer actually. Now why 5 is the answer, and what is the problem with 1, 2 and 3? You have to understand the context, what is happening here. The author quotes a statesman who is severely criticizing communism, and then the author brings up examples of similar atrocities committed by those colonial forces. And in the final paragraph, the author doubts the real intention of these statesmen, of these European Council members, members for criticizing the communism recently. And the author says that they are also making an attempt to establish the current world order as the final and most stable world order. It also hints towards Russia and China, that actually that could be the reason they are trying to counter these forces. And then in the Middle East, some Muslim countries are also not happy with the capital order, and they are also looking for alternatives. So in that final paragraph, the author is actually trying to suggest that we need to look deeper. The reason is different than what it looks at the surface level. So you need to understand the entire context and the reason behind this argument. So you say this, but I don't agree with that. So what I am trying to do? I am trying to neutralize your argument. Yeah, I am trying to do that. But am I trying to neutralize your argument by giving my own argument because I am trying to point out that the number of killings was more in the colonial regime than in communist regime? No, that's not my argument. I am trying to neutralize your argument, that part is correct, but I am trying to do that only to bring in light your real intention and your real motives behind these new attacks on communism. So there is a new wave of attack on communism, but there is a different reason, and I want people to look at the actual reason why this new criticism is there in place. So though these look to be tempting, but they should not be picked because they are like not the main idea. These things do not deal with the main idea. They are like dealing with the specific detail, or they are dealing with the sub ideas. But always the answer which deals with the main idea of the passage is likely to be the answer. And here 5 actually hits at the core. It talks about the main idea, that the author presents a counter argument, and the purpose of presenting the counter argument is to neutralize the argument of this Mr. Lindblad and to present the author's own argument, that one needs to go beyond the surface level and look at the real motives of these regimes. So 5 is the answer. Question number 4. Why, according to the author, is Nazism closer to colonialism than it is to communism? So here you can see that Mr. Goran Lindblad has compared communism with fascism and Nazism. According to him, both are very same. But author doesn't agree with this. Author says, while there is precious little connection between the ideas of fascism and communism, there is an intimate link between colonialism and Nazism. So, why the author is saying this and why the author thinks this? So, let us go to the option choices. One says that both colonialism and Nazism were examples of tyranny of one race over another. So, is it the reason that Nazism was closer? What is happening? So, is it the reason that Nazism was closer to colonialism? Because they both were examples of tyranny of one race over the other. This looks very promising for now. Let us analyze the other alternatives. 2 says that the genocides committed by the colonial and the Nazi regimes were of similar magnitude, and that is why they were like very close, they are very similar. So, again here you are not hitting the bullseye, here you are not addressing the real issue at the hand. The passage is about different ideologies, the passage is not about the number of killings. It is like which ideology was responsible for those killings, not the number of killings. So, here the comparison is being made in terms of number or magnitude, that the genocide committed by the colonial and Nazi regimes were of similar magnitude. In fact, somehow and somewhere the author is trying to say that genocides committed by the colonial forces were of a broader scale than Nazism. There is a comparison, but that is not the actual reason. Some of you might have gone with this, but here if you go with this, you are not hitting the bullseye. The passage, and in the passage the discussion is more about the ideology, that which ideology was closer to that. And 3 says that several ideas of Nazi regime were directly imported from the colonial regimes. This is mentioned otherwise in the passage. The passage says that several ideas of colonial regimes were borrowed, were taken from the Nazi regime. So, this is written otherwise in the passage. So, this is not true. 4 says both colonialism and Nazism are based on the principles of imperialism. So, this is something which is not mentioned in the passage, that they are both based on the principles of imperialism. In fact, the idea of Nazism is based on nationalism. So, it is the extreme form of patriotism or nationalism is Nazism. 5 says that while communism was never limited to Europe, both the Nazis and colonialists originated in Europe. So, again it is about the limitation of, so it was never limited to Europe, and they were they originated in Europe, and that is why they are closer. Again, this was not the reason which was given. You need to understand that ideologies are being discussed here, and both colonialism and Nazism were examples of tyranny of one race over the other. In fact, this thing has been hinted towards in the passage when it says it was a system of racist despotism. So, it talks about the bloodier record of European colonialism in comparison to the communist crimes, and it says that it was a system of racist despotism which dominated the globe in Stalin's time. So, here you see a comparison between colonialism and Nazism, and then it talks about the intimacy between the colonialism and Nazism, and then it goes on to talk about this term and some other examples of genocide. And here you see that this bequeaths its ideas and the personal directly to the Nazi party. So, this means that colonialism bequeaths its ideas and personal directly to the Nazi party. So, it borrows its ideas from Nazi party, while that option was saying that Nazism borrowed its ideas from colonialism. So, that was contrary to the fact mentioned here. So from here you can understand that the discussion is more about the ideology and less about the number of deaths. So both the ideologies revolved around this. And that is why this is the best answer choice, that they were both examples of tyranny of one race over the other race. So I hope you got the passage now, and that is all for now. We'll see you again with the next passage. Thank you very much.